Hey, welcome to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman. Yes, I'm a professional speaker who ironically has a speech impediment. I do what I do because any of us, including young people, can get crippled with anxiety about not being enough, and just look at their lives and go, "Oh my gosh, this is all overwhelming." So I like to remind people that they have brilliance within them, and that there is a way through to what they're dealing with. There's billions of problems in this world, but also billions of solutions. I'm so excited about today's guest. She she has an incredible story that actually involves speech in a unique way. So before I bring her out, let me introduce her first by this. By this. By the okay, little more synchronicity with the technical elements, Jason. Okay, now
Today's guest, Julie Melody.
hey, welcome back. Let me introduce Julie. When best-selling author Julie Melody was diagnosed with an incurable vocal disorder, Spasmodic Dysphonia, in 1998, she began a quest to recover her voice against the odds. She was unable to speak for close to 9 years. But she did not let that stop her. She took her lifelong interest in alternative healing modalities, combined that with miraculous information that came to her when she felt hopeless about ever speaking again, and was able to fully restore her voice. It's so inspiring. She's committed to helping others liberate their voices. Let me read that again. She's committed to helping others liberate their voices using the knowledge she's gained through her unique healing experience. So help me welcome Julie Melody.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Julie. Welcome to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I love that after your name you put the word breathe.
Yeah, we all need to do more of that.
And we'll definitely get more into that because it's just such an incredible tool for healing, and
Yeah.
also tool for staying alive. So
Yeah, it's a big part of my story.
but before we get into that, when you were 7 or 8, did you know the importance of breathing intentionally?
Not at all.
So, when you were like 7, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I spent a lot of time researching that and looking into it. You know, first as a young child would, and then later as an adolescent. I fully expected that was what I was going to be doing when I grew up. but I became an insurance agent instead.
Deborah, who introduced us, Deborah Swayze is on. She's amazing too.
Yeah. Hi, Deborah.
So, s- so and many of us change paths in life. How did you? So you were going down the I want to be a veterinarian path. How did you branch off to going into insurance?
Well, I actually got introduced to a family business that my grandfather started, and
Mm,
so it seemed like a good path at the time.
mm.
And so that's what I started to do um, shortly after high school, and turned it into a 27-year long career.
What are some of the moments in that career that you are most proud of?
Well, doing insurance was for me a little bit like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It wasn't exactly what I was most passionate about. And so I made it work by creating really meaningful relationships with my clients. And so I would scan the newspaper for stories about them, the local newspaper, and I'd send them cards if they had a baby, or send them a copy of an article about them if it showed up in the paper. I go to funerals when people in their family died, and so all of that really tied those people to me and me to them. And
So you were deeply into honoring who your clients were more than just selling them an insurance
ex-
product.
exactly, and that's what made it work for me. That's what made it so I could get up and go to the office every day, because I knew that I was going to see people I loved when I was there.
You knew you were, so you cultivated loving relationships with your clients, so you always knew you would see people you loved. You were kind to them, so they reflected that kindness back to you.
They did.
That's powerful. Um, I have so many questions for Julia as we get into her incredible story. But if any of you have any que- questions, please chime in. We'll love to consider your questions and talk about them. Or comments, of course. So during your career, you also became a mother, huh?
I did. I have three sons, and so it was busy. Uh, it was a juggle, taking care of three small children and running a business.
So what's the age difference between your sons?
There are 4 years between my first and second, and 2 years between my second and third. So it was it was pretty crazy. Um,
So you had a 6-year-old, a middle child, and a newborn.
yeah, yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Oh, yeah, I had a 4-year-old, uh, yeah, a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn. Yeah. So yeah, it was wild for a while, um, and it was challenging to get them up and ready to leave the house every morning. Eventually, I was able to. We had an apartment over the office, And so I could have them right upstairs while I was working, which was really the best of both worlds. So, and
So, so you were trying to work and babysit at the same time?
well, no, I had a sitter who was
Oh,
upstairs with them, but just having them that close to me so I could go upstairs if they needed me,
mm,
it was wonderful. And then
mm,
I got to
mm,
a point where I did have a certain level of flexibility, so I could go and help tutor kids in their classroom, read stories in the
mm.
classroom, and so it was really wonderful when things got to that point.
So what advice do you have for young parents who are trying to do the career, or who need to do the careers and who are trying to raise kiddos at the same time?
It's a great question. I I really hope, and it seems like there are some things that are changing in our society, but I really hope that more daycare opportunities that are close to work or attached to work open up.
Mm,
Um, it's such a an incredible challenge to manage work and home and raising small children. I guess if I had any advice, it would be to take the time to take care of yourself. It's so easy to be focused on what you have to do at work, what the kids need, what your husband needs. And sometimes as women, we can get lost in that and ignore ourselves. So that's key. Taking time
ta-
for self-care.
ta- Take time for self-care. Did um did stress show up for you during this time of I mean, I don't know why would you were managing a business and had three small kids, but did you ever have any feelings of stress
Oh,
even once during that time?
yeah, it was way more complicated than that. There were some issues that came up in my family of origin that impacted that business. And so juggling all of that in addition to just normal everyday taking care of my kids and taking care of the business really put a strain on me. And it was really interesting. I looked at events that happened during that period of time and saw how much stress I was really under. At the time, I was just handling what was coming my way and um, didn't really think about exactly how stressful it was. But um, looking back, I can see that I was really headed for some kind of physical breakdown. I just didn't know what it was going to be.
So this is such an important thing. Can you, because so many people deal with it, can you talk a little bit about how people or get or kind of soldier through stress at the time,
Mhm.
like really quite high functioning, but then later on it comes up. How does that work?
When I look back at that period of time, I really can see that I was stuck in fight or flight. Uh, I I had so many things coming at me at once.
How would you describe fight or flight just for
Well,
everyone?
it's the way that our body functions and responds when it is confronted with this threat or a challenge. And so when we have too many things that like that are uh, coming at us at one time, we can stay in fight or flight we're kind of on high alert. We're anticipating the next challenging thing that's going to come our way, and we don't often relax, or we're not really fully able to relax when we're in that state. And so living in that kind of a state can really take a toll on the body and affect our physiology in a very negative way.
So I have kind of this question will make sense eventually to everyone, but can you contrast what you just described about how we keep going and keep going versus how and don't relax versus how like an animal
Oh, sure.
deals with a stressful situation?
Yeah. Well, in our culture, strength and stoicism are valued. And so when we find ourselves in a place in our lives where we're being challenged like that, we soldier on. We
Mm,
try to stay strong, and we get rewarded culturally for doing that.
mm,
But we pay a price when we do that. And to answer the question that you asked, in the
mm,
natural world, animals, when they're confronted with very stressful events, they will immediately release the energy and the tension from that traumatic event. And then they're able to go on with their lives really as if nothing had ever happened. But because we don't do that, we carry that stress and energy along with us. Um, and it can build up in layers. The more stressful events we have happen, or the more trauma that we have in our lives, the deeper those layers get. And it actually takes root in the body at a cellular level. We don't
mm.
realize that we're carrying that around with us.
Well, your wisdom is going international. Mikey is in Amsterdam right now. Thanks for
Mm.
tuning in, Mikey. You're amazing. So we'll get to the healing work you're doing later, but would you describe the video of the that you showed of the is it the gazelle?
Yeah, yeah, I have a video that I show of an impala, and it's a really good illustration of how the body is intelligently designed.
So would you kind of describe what happens in the video because it's such a vivid image?
Sure. In the video I show, an impala has been captured by a big cat, and which is an extremely
By a lion, eh?
um, excuse me, yeah, some kind of big cat. I'm not sure what it is. Um, and so um, the the impala, what we see on the screen is the impala has gone into a frozen state. And often, and this happens to us as well, if we feel overpowered by a threat or a challenge, or if there's really no way for us to escape, the body will actually go into a frozen state. And
Hmm.
so the impala in the video is holding its breath, or its breath is slowed down so much that there's no evidence of breath in its body. It has
Hmm.
no muscle tone.
Hmm.
It doesn't even really look like it's alive. Uh,
Hmm.
and fortunately, the impala is able to escape that situation
Hmm.
and goes on to live another day. But there's a process, a physical process that the impala goes through once it realizes it's safe. It begins to fill its belly with oxygen, breathes very deeply into the belly.
Mm.
And that dispels the frozen state. Once it's reoxygenated its body enough, it begins this process of trembling and shaking. And so it's discharging all of the fear and anxiety and pain that it was going through in that situation.
So it's not thinking, "Oh my gosh, I just almost got eaten for dinner." It's moving, it's trembling, it's physically
It's a very
releasing that.
process, yep. And so once it discharges all of that pent up energy, it gets up and goes on its way. And so really that's what the body of all vertebrates is designed to do.
But what do we humans usually do instead of that?
We shut it down. Or if we don't shut it down, someone who's involved in caretaking in a stressful or traumatic situation will shut it down for us. So it's very rare that people will actually shake things out to the point where they've discharged enough of the energy to not carry it with them.
I think of how reflexively we sometimes as humans say the words don't cry,
Right.
don't cry, it's okay.
Yeah.
But the crying and the shaking is is healing, right?
Right. And there's all kinds of language in our culture that's common language that tells us that uh, that's not acceptable. Um, Stay strong and carry on.
Mm,
Keep a stiff upper lip. If
mm,
someone's falling apart, people will say, "Get yourself together, man."
mm,
Really, falling apart is really
mm.
very necessary in order to really fully release the situation.
Let's say that again. I heard you say we are falling apart is really necessary.
It really is necessary. I mean, it looks odd when when an animal goes through that process. It's it's odd to watch, and
Mm,
oftentimes when people um, are shaking after a traumatic situation, it's very hard for the people around them to witness that. And so the instinct is to intervene. The instinct is to comfort, um, maybe
mm,
cover that person with a warm blanket, or sometimes even sedate them.
mm,
There's something that happens that's really unfortunate. A lot of times when someone passes away, someone in the family has the tranquilizers and they'll distribute them
mm,
to other family members to spare them pain. But
mm.
really, that just blunts um, their feelings, and it doesn't allow them to go through that physical process that will actually help them to release their grief, release their fear, release their pain.
So how did the word spasmodic dysphonia come into your life? I assume you didn't learn them during a spelling bee in fourth grade.
uh, it was really interesting how that word came into my life. I actually heard it um, several months before I developed symptoms.
What? How did you hear that?
I I had a client who lived about 2 hours away, and they needed some help with life insurance,
Mm,
and I had to take care of that in person. So I got in my car and drove the 2 hours to go see them to start that policy for them, and the radio was on. A lot of times when I'm in the car, I'll turn the radio off, but I I left it on that day, and Diane Rehm, who was a national public radio host,
mm,
was talking about how it was her first day back after going through this period of time where she had suffered vocally, had been unable at many times to do her show. And so she had just gotten Botox injections in her vocal cords, which allowed her to speak fairly freely that day. And so she talked about this disorder she'd been diagnosed with and said that it was called spasmodic dysphonia. And I had no idea. I hadn't heard what she sounded like prior to that. And I had no idea that within about 2 or 3 months, I would be dealing with the symptoms of that disorder myself.
So what was the first day that you got symptoms? What was it like?
It was so odd because, that period of stress that I was telling you about that I had gone through, it was over. And I thought that I had managed it and handled it just fine. I had soldiered through it. And I decided that I was going to reclaim my life after that had passed. And I started this really physically demanding exercise program for a fitness competition that I had entered. And
So tell a little bit about that. It sounds fascinating.
well, I was really enjoying being physical like that, and I'd never been a very strong person, and I started to weight lift, and I loved it. And so I got to the point during the course of the competition that I was able to squat 185 pounds. I was
Oh
able
my
to
gosh,
deadlift
that's amazing.
165 pounds. I was really ticked off because I couldn't bench any more than 75 pounds. I wanted to hit 100, but I didn't get there. And so it was really interesting. As much as I was enjoying that, I was getting muscles. I felt really great. But this one particular night, I was doing circuit training and doing all of my heaviest lifts. And I don't know how to describe it other than it felt like my body hit the wall. Something didn't feel right after that workout. And within a few days, I started to notice that I was having trouble speaking. And at first, it felt like I had to think really hard to produce speech. I'd never had to think about talking before. And then it got to a point where no matter how hard I thought about making sound, making words, it was just impossible to do so. And about 4 months in, I walked into a coffee shop one morning. Somebody asked me my name, and I couldn't say it. I couldn't link 2 words together. I couldn't have a conversation. My voice sounded very strangled and tight, and parts of sounds would come out, but it was really difficult for people to understand what I was saying. And at that point, I decided that I needed to get in and see somebody and try to figure out what was going on. And that's when I was diagnosed.
Did the first doctor you saw did that doctor know it right away?
He gave me acids and sent me away for 2 weeks, and I came back and nothing had changed.
He gave you acids?
Yeah, he thought that possibly I might have had silent acid reflux, and maybe
Oh,
that's what the problem was. And then he put me on an antibiotic, and a couple more weeks went by, and then he gave me some nasal spray, and a couple more weeks went by. And so finally, I went back in to see him, and he said, "What's your profession again?" And I told him that I was an insurance agent, and he got this really sad look on his face.
what?
And then he just handed me a piece of paper, and it said, "Diagnosis: spastic dysphonia," which is another term for spasmodic dysphonia. And then he said that what he recommended was speech therapy. And since I had heard about spasmodic dysphonia before I was affected by it, and I knew that Diane Rehm had used Botox as treatment, I asked him why he wasn't recommending that. And then he got this horrified look on his face because he knew that I understood what he was telling me. He wanted to get me out of the office before I knew what he had told me, because he didn't want to have to handle the fallout from it. And that happened in the car on the way home. Lots of tears and lots of crying, and yeah, because he had just told me without telling me that I could expect to have this challenge for the rest of my life. And he didn't know I realized that.
Wow. 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 So how did you saying you were an insurance agent tip him off that it was spasm?
Well, it didn't tip him off that it was spasmodic dysphonia, but he knew at that point that it was very unlikely that I was going to be able to continue in that career.
Oh, I see what you
Me. And so, yeah, he just knew that I was in for a really rough time, especially considering the career I had.
So how you said in the car you started crying a lot, but how in the weeks after this did you cope with this devastating news?
Well, I was trying to figure out a way to fix the problem, and so I had read. There wasn't a whole lot of information about spasmodic dysphonia then, but I had read over and over again that people who were affected by the disorder typically had histories of severe stress. I knew that was the case for me. And I suspected that had a lot to do with it. My gut told me that trauma I had experienced in my childhood played a role in the development of the disorder as well. And so I tried a number of things to make a change and create a space for healing. I tried,
What do you try?
well, I tried resting my voice. I tried relaxation CDs. I got some subliminal recordings and tried to program my subconscious to to heal. I read a book. I think the doctor who wrote it, I think his name was Daniel Sarno, and he talked about spasmodic dysphonia and said that it was caused by repressed rage. And so I poured over that book and his techniques, and I spent 6 months, about 6 months trying to get in touch with repressed rage. I figured any rage that I had was pretty much at the surface, but so, but nothing worked. Nothing that I tried made any difference at all. And I did do speech therapy, and I sounded as bad after 6 months of that as I had when I started.
So you spend the 6 months trying one thing, and then another thing, and then another thing, and then nothing really worked.
I was
So
kind
what
of,
do you
I, I was kind of trying all of it at the same time, and and I figured that something would stick, but nothing did. And so um, I I was at work one day, and I was on the telephone, and anyone who has spasmodic dysphonia knows that talking on the telephone is the absolute worst. Speaking to someone in person is challenging enough, but for some reason, the phone just amplifies the problem. And so I would have to concentrate so hard when I was at work. And I was on the phone that day, and a friend came in um, and was talking with the people that I worked with at the agency. And I overheard him telling them that he thought God had taken my voice away to teach me a lesson. And I was horrified. I was completely demoralized by that comment. And so I stayed strong and muscled through the rest of the workday, and I got home and went into a room and just fell apart, just sobbed and cried and begged for an answer. And I don't know exactly how to describe what happened next, other than after the kids were in bed, my husband fell asleep. The house seemed really quiet that night, and there was this word in my spirit. I didn't hear it with my ears. It was just there, and it was hypothyroidism. And I thought, hypothyroidism, what's that? So I went to the computer, I typed in the word, and pulled up a list of symptoms, and I had every single symptom.
So you had never consciously heard this term before?
No. And
Wow.
no. And so my mom had thyroid disease, though, and I had been checked for it a couple of times, but I always tested normal on blood tests. So I went in and saw my doctor the next day and asked them if they would treat my thyroid. And it took about a year and a half of trial and error. I finally discovered that I had a stress-driven thyroid conversion disorder. And once I got to the right dose of the right medication, within 6 months, my voice popped right back in and was perfect. And so I figured that solved the problem. The whole issue of stress, the whole issue of trauma went on the back burner.
So you were talking again. You just could go on with your life.
Perfect. And so my voice was great for 8 years. And then my doctor made this really minor adjustment of the dose that I was taking. And within a month, I sounded as horrible as I had in the beginning. And
What was that like?
well, I figured initially I'd just go back up to the dose of medication that worked and everything would be good. But then nothing happened and nothing happened. And so that relapse lasted for 5.5 years. And it was so difficult because what do you do when what worked before isn't working?
What do you do when what worked before isn't working?
Yeah. And I didn't have the first idea what to do. After we kind of monkeyed around with the dose of my medication for a while, I figured I had to figure something else out. And so I knew that stress had been an issue, and I knew that trauma had been an issue. So I started earnestly looking for ways to deal with that. And ironically, I was invited to this retreat. I had no idea what was going to happen there, and I was introduced to breath work.
So what made you say yes to a retreat that you had no idea?
I don't know. I it just seemed like it was something that I should do, and as it turned out, it was instrumental in my healing.
So why breath work? I mean, we're human. We all breathe.
We all breathe.
We're here because we breathe. So why go beyond that?
Well, initially, there wasn't really much background or instruction given at the retreat other than you're going to breathe into your belly. You're going to breathe in and out through your mouth. And then they talk to us about what we might expect to happen after that. And it didn't really make sense to me that what they were saying could possibly happen. They said you might feel emotional, you might cry, you might feel angry, you might start laughing, you might start shaking. I thought, I lay down and breathe all the time. I don't know how that could possibly cause that kind of reaction, but I did it. And the next thing I knew, probably within about 5 minutes of breathing deeply like that into my abdomen, something shifted, something changed inside of me. I started to tremble and shake. The next thing I knew, I was crying. And afterwards, I felt so light. I felt energized. I felt different than I had felt when I laid down on the mat. And that was the beginning of my recovery. I incorporated that practice into my life. And the more I did it, the better my voice worked. And so it made the difference for me.
So how does this practice of breathing in and out through the mouth down to the belly, how does that relieve stress? Did you say relieve stress, or how would you describe it?
It relieves stress. It releases trauma. It releases tension that's stored in the body. And so I didn't really understand at that point how it was helping my voice. I just knew it was. And when I got ready to start writing the book that I wrote, Breaking the Stranglehold of Spasmodic Dysphonia, I started,
Available on Amazon.
yeah, it's on Amazon. Um, I started to really examine why. Why did this help so much? Why is this working? I knew of other people who were dealing with other physical challenges, who were having tremendous recoveries, unexpected recoveries using that work. And so that's when I started to figure out that it had something to do with the vagus nerve, that it was helping to tone the vagus nerve, helping that to function as it's intended to function. And then that was creating physical shifts for people. They were able to shift out of fight or flight into their sympathetic nervous system, actually able to relax and sleep. And so that was facilitating a lot of healing in the body. And so that's when it all started to make sense. When I started to look into the science of breath work, what it does to the body, how it changes the way the brain works, it all started to make sense.
So, one of the things about stress and soldiering through is it can seem like the only option available to us at the time.
Mhm.
What would you advise someone who feels like they're in that stage of life when they're juggling so much and spinning so many plates
Mhm.
and just don't know what to do?
I would recommend that people who find themselves in that place, and I think we're talking about people who don't necessarily have physical challenges at that point, um, by incorporating something like this into their life, by incorporating something into their life that is that relaxes the body and helps it to recharge. Um, it can be done to prevent anything majorly going wrong physically down the road. Um,
Hmm.
and by managing and addressing that stuff when it happens, um, you prevent the strain on the body, the strain on the vagus nerve, the strain that is inevitable when trauma is stored in the body. I'll give you an example. Uh, when the lockdowns first happened, I had heard that there were things going on at the grocery store that I didn't want to have to deal with. People were taking things out of other people's carts and
Hmm.
doing really crazy, wild things.
Hmm.
Um, and so I waited some time to go to the grocery store. And when I walked in, every shelf was bare. Um,
Hmm.
I couldn't even get all of the ingredients for one dinner that I had intended to make that night. And for some reason, even though I knew that the shelves were going to be restocked, and for some reason, that hit me really hard.
Yeah.
And a lot of fear came up. I, I have Irish ancestors, and I
Hmm.
know that carry some things within me, ancestral things about famine. And so I was pretty upset by the time I left the store. So I went home and I talked to my husband about what I had seen and how upsetting it was to me. And I just stood there and let him hold me while I shook. And I
Hmm.
just let myself shake.
Hmm.
And wasn't necessarily breathing deeply, but I was discharging that energy,
Hmm.
discharging that fear right when it came up. And so I didn't have to carry it forward with, and I felt a lot better afterwards. And I didn't experience that again, even though I was in the store a few times and dealing with the exact same situation. But it didn't bother me because I took care of it right up front.
Well, powerful, powerful. So you offer sessions that I've actually gotten to benefit from, and you explain them so well, and would you talk a little bit about like the benefits of the sessions and also the joy that can come from the session?
Our roots are really in in-person work, but when the lockdown started, we weren't going to be able to do that, and so we had to find a different way. And we started doing virtual sessions on Zoom, and so we do those Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. And on Saturdays, we also do the workshop part that explains why we do the work, how to do the work, and prepares people for experiencing a session.
And I can't recommend the workshop part enough. It's such a good explanation of how stress works and how it gets held in the body and how it can be released in a productive way. It's just a brilliant explanation.
Thank you. So we knew that people needed that work even more than they had before, and we also knew that a lot of people were very negatively affected financially by what was going on. So we do those workshops free, and they're free workshops, and we've really just run on donations for that part of our work. And we did our first in-person one-day workshop a couple weeks ago, and that was an incredible experience. And we have a retreat coming up June 3rd, 4th, and 5th in Michigan. And
yay, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it will be good to be back to doing the work in person. But the kinds of things that we've seen, it's really amazing how people respond to the work. And almost every single time that we do the work, we hear people say, I don't know what that was about, but I feel so light. I don't know what that's about, but I feel so energized. I don't know what that was about, but I feel so good. And so the best part about the work is that it's designed to help people release what they're carrying around with them that's not serving them. But it doesn't create a situation where they relive the events. So there's kind of an amnesia that's attached to what comes up and what people release. And we've seen people talk about shifts and changes in their relationships after being engaged in the work for a while. We've seen people have increased vocal function after doing the work for a while. And there have been more dramatic healings as well. Without making any claims about that, it seems that the work creates a space for healing to occur. And so it's just so, it's such an honor to watch people engage in the work, to be able to support them in the work, and to see those kinds of changes happening in lives, real tangible results from staying engaged in the work.
If someone is like, this work sounds interesting and like it could possibly benefit me, what's the best way for them to contact you?
They can contact me. They can send me an email. My email.
Remind me of your email, Julie. I got that part.
It's all lowercase Julie@breathemi.com.
Julie at breathemichigan.com. Nice.
And then they can also send me a friend request on Facebook. I do a lot of communicating on Messenger, and we have a Messenger group set up for, it's JULIE. So you just need to switch the L and the I.
Nice. Thanks for catching that.
Sure. And then people can contact me, send me a text. If texting is easier for you, I know when I was dealing with SD symptoms, during the relapse, texting became available, and it saved my life in a lot of ways.
Did I get your email right?
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. So you can send me a text at 810-923-5973.
810-923.
5973. And we do have a page on Facebook, a Breathe page on Facebook, and all of our workshops are posted there, and our sessions.
Is that way?
That's it.
I'm so inspired by people who have stuff come up in their life and then figure out a way through, because it's a really challenging journey, and
it is.
And there's not always simple automatic solutions.
I guess the way that I looked at it is that I knew what people who were dealing with SD were going through, and I had found a way back to my voice. How could I not tell them? How could I not share that information? How could I leave them in the place where they expected that this was what they were going to deal with for the rest of their lives? And so it just seemed necessary for me to tell my story. And you know, people don't just get their voices back literally. They get their voices back figuratively as well. They find ways to say what's important to them. They find ways to say what's necessary for them to say, whether it comes out of their mouth or they write it or they express it in some other way. And so we all need to find our voices in that way.
We each of us has a story and has wants and concerns, and it's up to us to find our voices, however that looks.
Yeah, however that looks. Yeah. So, and
Mm,
and I appreciate the way that you use your voice and the
mm,
stories that you tell through this podcast. I appreciate you more than you know.
mm. Th- Thanks so much, Julie. Thanks, th- thanks so much. That means a lot to me. And thanks for sharing your story and also now sharing this method of of deep breathing and releasing and healing. So just one more question I ask every guest before we end. So I talk about the power of doing our imperfect best, and what that means to me is we can have a vision of our best, but when imperfections come up to and mistakes to learn from them and then use that to keep moving towards the best instead of thinking this is impossible.
Mm,
But my last question is, what does doing your imperfect best mean to you?
mm. I guess it just means keeping going,
Mm,
regardless of what you're confronted with. It means finding your value, um, even
mm,
when you can't function to the standards that society has set for you. Um, we all have tremendous value. We all have unique gifts that are
mm,
ours to share. And so seeing, staying focused on those gifts and what you have to offer, um, even when you're confronted, and especially when you're confronted with challenges, is so important.
mm. Thanks so much, Shirley. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Um, I so I just love Awkwardly Awesome podcast. I each week I learn more and I get freshly inspired, and the human spirit is so powerful that sometimes that can seem like there's so many problems in the world, but humans are amazing. Well, as there's problems coming, we are coming up with solutions, and just so inspiring. And next week, please tune in. That's next week. That's a little preview. Next week, please tune in for Roger Cheatham, and he has just a phenomenal story of resilience after being a victim of a tragic event. So please tune in for that, and then also tune in for more of my amazing technical abilities, which we'll all get to have a little chuckle at, and that are just part of the show. Thank you for your time and listening. Make it an awesome rest of your week.